And then we have to talk about quiet versus forced breathing. So what is quiet breathing? What is forced breathing? So quiet breathing is what you were doing before I pointed it out. So the thing is like it's what your normal breathing. You don't think about every single breath you take and every inhalation, exhalation. Although it's kind of funny, every time I mention quiet breathing and it's unconscious, I see people kind of like being a little more like conscious and aware of their breathing. But this is something your diaphragm does all the time, and this mostly involves your diaphragm is contracting and relaxing. But the thing is that this is your quiet breathing when you're not really thinking about it when you're doing your daily duties and routines. You're doing quiet breathing. But forced breathing is when you're actually using conscious thought. You're like, okay, now I'm going to inhale, now I'm going to exhale. That's forced breathing. Yeah, and you can do so. That's some sort of conscious thought, and it needs effort. So quiet breathing, that's the unconscious part that's controlled by the subconscious, unconscious part of your brain. But the forced breathing is the part that when you're actually thinking about it and controlling it using your skeletal muscles, that's forced breathing. And it uses more muscles, so this is why you're able to inhale more than you're usually breathing, and also exhale more than you're usually breathing. So these are your respiratory muscles, and actually this is like a samples. Different textbooks, different references have different lists of these accessory versus primary respiratory muscles. But in general, primary respiratory muscles, these are the ones that can involuntarily contract and relax. So these are the ones responsible behind your quiet breathing. So you're going to use your diaphragm and external intercostal muscles for quiet breathing. Now, accessory respiratory muscles, these are the ones that you can add to give a little boost to the actions of your primary respiratory muscles. So accessory respiratory muscles, these are the ones you engage during voluntary forced breathing. And again, do I want you to memorize this list? Maybe if you're going on to especially if you're going into any sort of if you're medicine or PT, it would be good to kind of have a list of this in your mind offhand. But again, this is why I don't test too much or expect you to know this list verbatim in this class. Now, the thing is that you have to move air in and out of the respiratory system, right? Yep, and there's a good question. Is this why your abdominal and intercostal muscle get so sore after sprinting or long distance running? Yeah, because again, especially when you're doing exercise, you have to recruit more muscles, not only to make yourself do the whatever movement you're doing in the sport, but by expending more energy, your body needs more oxygen, it has more oxygen demands, and also is generating more carbon dioxide. So you're going to increase your breathing, right? So all the muscles increased that involved in your breathing, they're going to get a workout as well. Okay, so then inhalation. Remember, inhalation, expand the lungs. So how do you expand the lungs? Lift your rib cage up, but not only up, you can also expand it outwards as well. And so the thing is that inhalation always requires muscles. Thing is that, okay, to lift anything off the ground or fight against gravity, you need to use some sort of muscles, right? Like things don't rise up by themselves. That would be some really spooky But the thing is that inhalation is always an active process because, again, gravity is going to bring things down. Gravity is going to cause things to collapse. But to lift things up, you need to use actual energy. Now, quiet inhalation only uses those primary respiratory muscles, so things like those external intercostals and the diaphragm. So again, the diaphragm, when it constricts and contracts, it flattens, creating more space for your lungs, and a partial vacuum as well. And then the external intercostals are going to lift not only upwards, but also outwards. So your rib cage is going to create more volume. Now, these are I think this is fair. Like in pretty much almost every textbook, the primary respiratory muscles, this is pretty much like canon, I think. Unless there was another source, by all means share it with me. But diaphragm and external intercostals, these are primary respiratory muscles for inhalation. And external intercostals, so again, notice that they're not straight up and down. They're actually at a slight slant, right? So the thing is that they have an origin and insertion. And if you remember, if you've had if you had a previous physiology class like PHYL 141, you remember that Insertions pull toward origins. So which way are the external intercostals going to pull? They're going to pull not only upwards, but also outwards. So that's why that kind of slant we see here, this oblique sort of angle right here, that's why it's important. It's not only pulling up, but it's also pulling these ribs outwards as well. So upwards and out. And then the thing is that forced breathing and inhalation. So what we see here is that basically any other muscles that can lift the rib cage and move it upwards and outwards, these are potential accessory muscles, and this is an example of all of these. And look at all the directions. They're either moving toward the outward, like expanding it outwards this way, or they're lifting the rib cage upwards and more superior, right? So this is how you do forced inhalation. You're not just using your external intercostals and diaphragm. Now you're going to use more muscles that lift upwards and out. So that's why you saw in that previous video, that's why you saw some of these exercise, or oxysize I think they were calling it. That's why you saw their neck muscles really engage and start flexing, because they're using all these forced inhalation muscles to, I guess, inhale more air. So again, yeah, I love that. Anyway, so exhalation, so that increases your pressure. And do you necessarily need to use energy to exhale? Well, thing is that to exhale, you just need your pressure in your lungs to be greater than the pressure in the outside environment, right? So the thing is that you just need to force air out. Now, quiet exhalation, that's a passive process. And why is that? Well, if you're standing up, or even if you're lying down, what can happen is that gravity, just by gravity alone, it can collapse your rib cage and bring it down back to earth. Because again, remember, during inhalation, you're living upwards. But like, do I need any energy to let this pen drop? Nope. Gravity just lets the pen carry it downwards by gravity alone, right? So quiet exhalation is passive. And what happens with the diaphragm? Well, the diaphragm is relaxing. So by relaxing, it doesn't really need additional energy. All it has to do is relax without any ATP. So gravity and muscle relaxation, these contribute to the quiet exhalations. But again, no muscle contraction. So if I ask you what muscles are involved in quiet exhalation, there's a list of muscles. If you pick any of the muscles, you're going to get it wrong, because again, quiet exhalation, no energy required. Now, with forced breathing and exhalation, you can breathe past your normal quiet breathing exhalation. And then again, so basically any forced inspiration or exhalation, they are active processes. Why? Because you're engaging additional muscles. So what we're having here is accessory respiratory muscles. And what you notice about these? Well, these are going to either flatten the rib cage, or they're going to pull it down. And actually what we have here is we have the rectus abdominis. So or if you like layman's terms, like the six packs right here. So if you contract it, what's it doing? It's actually forcing a little more pressure into the diaphragm and thoracic cavity, and thereby also helping with exhalation. So all these accessory respiratory muscles, they're all going to increase the pressure on the lungs one way or the other. So did you notice what happened to her abdominals when she was doing that? So she's actually creating a partial vacuum by doing that forced exhalation right there, right? So that's why I included that video, because it's like showing all the accessory muscles that potentially be involved in forced inhalation and exhalation. All right, so the internal intercostals. So what happens is that for the external, we have our origins insertions this way. Now, if you were here last semester, you might remember a saying I had, like, for every muscle's action, there's another muscle that undoes that action. So for the internal intercostals, what happens is that between each pair of ribs, the insertion and origin are reversed compared to the external intercostals. So internal intercostals, how do they work? Well, remember, insertions pull toward origins. So these internal intercostals, which help with forced exhalation, they're going to pull these muscles down, the rib cage down, and flatten it, thereby increasing the pressure on your lungs.